What if I told you that this scene from the end of Loki season 1 is going to end up being the whole reason that Doctor Doom wants to destroy the multiverse? You see, this is the sacred timeline. It's the first time we actually got a real good look at it. And at the time, a lot of fans asked, why would there be separate strands in this sacred timeline? What do these separate strands actually indicate? Well, I believe it all has to do with this scene here. This scene is Doctor Strange remembering a different version of the timeline. This is a version of the timeline that happened before the multiversal war and before He Who Remains put the multiverse on a time loop. And the timeline that Doctor Strange is remembering happened before the timeline was spread into these different strands.
What did he say?
Okay, look, this is already nerdy as fuck. You might be a little confused, but in this video, I'm going to explain what I think is actually going on with the multiversal saga, what the motivation for Doom is going to end up being. I am pretty damn sure that this is actually what is going on, and a lot of this comes from Alex Perez and some little hints and teases that he has made, so I'm going to explain it all in this video. Oh, and yes, this will absolutely blow your fucking mind, as a lot of the content that I've been making has been blowing your mind. Don't act like you're not impressed. Okay, so what am I even talking about here? Well, it all goes back to the Infinity Saga, to He Who Remains, the Sacred Timeline, and the TVA. In the Loki show, we learn that He Who Remains basically scripted the entire timeline, like all of the events of the Infinity Saga happened because He Who Remains allowed them to happen that way. And if they ever strayed too far from what he wanted and then created a branch timeline, he pruned it, destroying it completely. Now, what a lot of fans have been pointing out for years is that that implies that there was a version of the timeline that existed before He Who Remains took control of it and scripted it all out. But the question always was, what did that original timeline look like? And here's the thing, many fans, including myself, just speculated that it was very likely a more comic book type of a timeline, meaning this was a timeline where the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, the Spider-Man characters, and the Avengers all coexisted, and this was a timeline where it was just more like the comics. Because in the 90s, Marvel was losing their ass. They were basically going to go bankrupt, and so they sold off the licenses to their most popular characters to Hollywood studios. This is why Fox ends up with the Fantastic Four and the X-Men license. Sony ends up with the Spider-Man license, which unfortunately they still hold to this fucking day. And Marvel Studios has the license to the Avengers. They literally buy back the rights to 10 different Marvel characters around the time of 2008 when they're planning this whole MCU thing, and they decide to start with Iron Man and build up the Avengers. Now, although this had been a big fan theory and many people had talked about it, it was never confirmed by any insiders or scoopers until very recently. Just a couple of weeks ago, Alex Perez posted an article on the Cosmic Circus in which he detailed a plot line that was going to be included in the Kang Dynasty. And real quick, I just want to say here, although it is not entirely clear whether or not this plotline will still be used in Doomsday, because like technically Alex is saying that this was what the plan was for the Kang Dynasty when Kang was still a part of this, I tend to believe that this is still going to be what it is, and I will come back to that later, but it all has to do with something that Alex said in the past year about what Doctor Doom's motivation really was. What Alex recently confirmed to us was that there was a version of the universe where all of these characters existed together, something that was going to be called Prime 616 or the Prime Universe. And essentially, just like we all thought, it was going to be a comic book version of the Marvel Universe where all of these characters coexisted, and it would eventually lead to the creation of Nathaniel Richards in the 31st millennia. He would then start investigating the multiverse, then there would be a multiversal war, and that war is ended by He Who Remains, who recreates the timeline and of course isolates it from the rest of time, which we'll come back to. Dude, I know this is so fucking, it's hard to explain this shit, because you see, something else that Alex mentioned was the fact that Kang, or He Who Remains, had purposely removed certain characters from the sacred timeline, like the X-Men, like the Fantastic Four. But even more recently, Alex revealed something even more insane about what this meant for the different characters. Going back to that scene with Doctor Strange when he is in 838 and he is introduced to Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four, Doctor Strange has has this weird memory of a band that charted in the 60s. Now, we all should have noticed right away how weird this scene is, because Stephen Strange has a photographic memory. He doesn't vaguely remember anything, especially music. I mean, that is set up in the first Doctor Strange movie. Stephen is really, really good at remembering bands and music. So it was an obvious clue in that scene that there's something weird about Stephen Strange not remembering a band. Well, recently Alex revealed that why this scene happened was because Stephen Strange is having a vague memory of the Prime Universe. And remember, the Prime Universe is the way the timeline was before the Multiversal War and before He Who Remains separates everything out into the sacred timeline. And because there's some vague memory or an echo of a memory of what the Fantastic Four actually were in the Prime Universe, Stephen Strange has a weird, vague memory of the Fantastic Four as a band that charted in the 60s, when in all reality, they were actually a group of astronauts that went up into space in the 60s, got their powers, and came back and helped to form the Marvel Universe. On a side note, when you look at the movie Spider-Man No Way Home, there is a scene where Peter 1, Tom Holland's Peter Parker from the 616, he talks about being a part of the Avengers team. And Toby and Andrew actually don't know what it is, but then something really weird happens, and that is Andrew Garfield saying, "Is that a band? Were you in a band?" Look, maybe this is just a weird coincidence, or maybe it's the case that names like the Avengers and names like the Fantastic Four do sort of linger in the echoes of memories in these different people, because they all kind of remember what the Prime Universe was like. And maybe bands just are the way that those things are remembered, because you think about it, band names and superhero team names are very similar. Look, I'm not telling you 100% that Andrew Garfield said that because the Avengers were something he remembers and that you always remember stuff like that as a band. Like, maybe that's what it is, maybe not. But regardless, Alex was pretty fucking clear that the reason Doctor Strange remembered the Fantastic Four as a band is because he is having some kind of a memory of the Prime Universe. But hold on, because it gets even more fucking crazy. This is nuts. Alex goes on to say that that's why certain beings or characters might end up on a timeline, just not as the variant with their powers. He says it is possible that Eric Lyncher exists on the 616 timeline just as some dude, and maybe Charles Xavier exists in the 616 timeline just as a regular college professor. Now hold the phone, because that is absolutely insane, and we need to talk about something else that Alex revealed within the past year. Alex, I'm sorry, but I do fucking read all your shit. I'm pretty sure you know way more than you lead on, and you let a little bit out here and there, and then I figure it out. I'm pretty sure that's why you fucking hate me, and I'm sorry, but shit, man, maybe just shut the fuck up. Something else that Alex said was that in the original plan for the Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars and the Mutant Saga after it, Doctor Doom was going to be involved. In fact, Doctor Doom and the X-Men had this really interesting thing in common, and that is that they were two elements that were removed from the sacred timeline. But hold on, because if the X-Men are removed from the sacred timeline, and yet Eric Lyncher still exists in the sacred timeline, just not as an X-Man, he never gets his X gene, and Charles Xavier exists on the sacred timeline, but just never gets his X gene, and therefore just becomes a regular college professor, then wouldn't Victor Von Doom and Reed Richards and that entire family also exist on the 616 and just not have gone into space to get their cosmic ray powers? And the thing is, I want to stop this video for a second and just tell you that I believe this is what it is. And I also think that Marvel Comics has been sort of showing us, the fans, how this could work. Because right now in Marvel Comics, the Ultimates line is a huge success. It is a big, big deal for them over there. And in the Ultimates comics, you essentially have an evil version of Reed Richards that creates an alternate version of the 616 timeline where he prevents as many characters as he can from becoming the heroes that they were in 616. He goes to the moment where the spider was going to bite Peter Parker and he steals it, preventing him from becoming Spider-Man until way later, and on and on and on. And I think Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios did that in Marvel Comics specifically to sort of foreshadow and kind of like get audiences used to the idea that this was a thing that could happen, that a very powerful time traveling character that had a knowledge of how a universe's events would unfold could technically create a branch timeline of that universe and then manipulate it because they knew exactly what was going to happen. Okay, but back to the theory, there's one big problem here, right? Because if He Who Remains wanted to get rid of Doctor Doom, and if he wanted to get rid of the Fantastic Four, and if he wanted to get rid of the X-Men, why wouldn't he just delete them completely from the timeline? Well, that goes back to this thing in Loki season 1 and the whole idea of the sacred timeline being made up of separate strands. You see, I think the most obvious answer here is that he couldn't. And there are many different ways to explain why he couldn't. One being that perhaps if he actually removed these characters, he would prevent his own self from existing in the Prime universe. Like, I know that's a weird idea and that's technically not how it's all supposed to go, right? But there is causal time travel, as we have seen through Loki season 2 with the time slipping. So maybe it's just the case that if He Who Remains actually just deleted all of these characters that he didn't like from the Prime universe, then he runs the risk of not existing himself. Another possible explanation is that just because of eternity, or perhaps another concept like the canon events from the Spider-Verse movies, or the fixed moments in time from the What If show, it seems like there are aspects of timelines and universes that simply cannot be altered. And so it is possible that He Who Remains realized he actually couldn't eliminate the X-Men. He couldn't eliminate the Avengers. He could not eliminate Spider-Man, and he could not eliminate the Fantastic Four. But what he could do was separate out the Prime universe timeline into different strands. And in one particular strand, the X-Men would exist and exist exactly the way they were meant to, with their X gene becoming the mutants. And by the way, you can roughly think of that as all of the Fox X-Men movies and all of their timelines. And that's why in the Spider-Man movies, like Andrew's Saga and Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, he's the only hero and there are no X-Men, there are no Avengers. And then in the Fantastic Four movies, whether it's the Josh Trank ones or the old ones from the early 2000s, that's why there are no Avengers, no X-Men, and no Spider-Man in those films. And that's why in the sacred timeline, there are no X-Men and there are no Fantastic Four. Okay, let's try to pull this all together. So there was a Prime universe. It had all the different characters together. It leads to a multiversal war. He Who Remains ends the multiversal war, takes control of the timeline, and separates the timeline into different strands, which then separate the characters of the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, Spider-Man, and the Avengers. Technically not Spider-Man and the Avengers, because Tom Holland's Spider-Man exists, but we also know there are other universes where there are no Avengers and stuff, so just the just fuck, you know what I'm fucking saying. So there were at least a couple of universes where there's just Spider-Man, right? Now, we can assume the reason He Who Remains separates these characters is so they don't all team up against him in the next multiversal war. Because remember, he doesn't just take control of the timeline, he takes control of the timeline and puts it on a loop. No matter what happens, at the end of time, it will either lead to him just winning and controlling everything from the last multiversal war, or there will be a new multiversal war and he will go and take over again, destroy everything, recreate the timeline, and basically just set everything back on its loop. I mean, hell, even the loom is a thing created to just keep everything on a loop. If everything gets out of control and the whole multiverse starts expanding too far, the loom is supposed to shred it destroy it and remake the timeline. And of course, it's really important when you're creating a loop that you set things up so that you can always win an inevitable multiversal war. And by the way, this is actually why I think Sadie Sink is still playing Jean Grey in Spider-Man Brand New Day. Because if you'll remember, Jeff Snyder had scooped that friggin' Sadie Sink was going to play Jean Grey. Then all of a sudden she gets cast in the Spider-Man movie, and that sort of threw some cold water on that. However, if this is actually what Marvel is doing with the different characters existing, just not having their X gene, then this character, regardless of what she's named, could be a Jean Grey that just never got her X gene. She never became Jean Grey. Maybe she had a different name, maybe she chose a different name and she lived out a completely different life. This would be crazy. This would actually be Marvel sort of setting up a character that doesn't even know they're Jean Grey to be Jean Grey, and then after Secret Wars and the reset, she's going to be Jean Grey. Now, another reason that I think this is what it is because of a concept introduced in Multiverse of Madness where you have characters dreaming of their variants in the multiverse. Stephen Strange keeps having dreams of himself dying, and that's revealed to be a variant of himself going around the multiverse killing his own variant. And it is explained in that movie that every time you dream, you are actually sort of dream walking into another variant of you somewhere out there in the multiverse. And so if that's what it is, then this Jean Grey, this Sadie Sink that doesn't know she's Jean Grey, would be having nightmares of various versions of herself dying throughout the multiverse, because we also know that the multiverse is collapsing. Look, man, there's even more to it than this. I've been cooking up some absolutely insane theories. Like, for instance, this actually could explain the Ralph Boner situation, which is a spell that was used to bring back a person that was her brother. Well, why do you think it was the friggin' guy from the Fox X-Men universes? Like, if this is what it is, then all of a sudden that makes a lot more sense, because he was either just some dude or he was some dude on a branch timeline of 616 that actually was her brother that never got his X gene. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? Anyway, I'm gonna leave this one for here for now. I just feel like this was maybe way too nerdy, way too crazy. Let me know what you think about this. I truly believe this is what it is, and it actually explains a lot of what's going on with Avengers Doomsday. And again, I'll make more videos on this because it's pretty crazy. As I always say, I hope you are having an awesome and a nerdy day, and I'll see you in the next